Hello, everyone. Welcome to Knowledge Speaks, where we have conversations towards a more knowledgeable world. Today's topic is an enormous, juicy, delicious topic, which is Knowledge Speaks towards a more sustainable world. Now, before we dive into this enormous but very interesting topic, I just want to invite a few of my colleagues who are here on the call to introduce themselves. We're so excited to be here. We have colleagues joining us both from Knowledge and from Elsevier, and we're actually joining from all over the world. I think we have 4 countries represented out of the 5 people joining the call from where they are located. So with that, if everyone could just take a few seconds to briefly introduce themselves to the audience, I think that would be really helpful before we kick off the conversation. And I'll lead us off. My name is Samantha Miles. I am a strategic advisor for Knowledge within the training and consulting department, and my primary focus is around supporting training and development programs, professional development programs within the higher education and research sector. And my background is in higher education leadership, and I'm originally from the US, as you can probably tell from my very strong accent, but I've been lucky enough to work around the world across MENA countries, Australia, and a few other places. So with that, I'd love to hand it off to one of my other colleagues.
I'm Abigail Enoch. I'm an editorial assistant in the Knowledge publishing department, and I also oversee our work on the SDGs and our work with the SDG Publishers Compact. And my background is in public health practice and in academic research.
My name is Emily Chanowski. I'm head of publishing at Knowledge. More generally, as well as handling the academic publishing aspect of our business, I work generally focusing around sort of larger strategic areas around the thought leadership to really help promote various aspects of sort of open science and making academia a safe place to practice. My background is originally in commercial publishing, and prior to that, I had an academic background in religion and literature, which I try and continue when I occasionally have time to go to conferences and write papers.
My name is Cameron Cardan. I'm the founder and CEO of Knowledge. I've been working in the publishing industry for over 20 years. And the mission of Knowledge is to move towards a more knowledgeable world. And basically, we are a mission-driven company trying to focus on enhancing education, research in higher education institutions wherever we can and through our different services.
And I'm Rachel Martin. I'm the Global Director of Sustainability at Elsevier. I head up our climate action program, and I drive our SDG approach. I've been with Elsevier since 2010, so a little while. And I have held various different positions. I came in at the journals group and have worked extensively in recent years in the industry. And I was part of the team that launched the SDG Publishers Compact. I'm also involved in a lot of the industry groups, including the SDM's new SDG Academic Forum, and also HETI, which is the Higher Education Sustainability Initiative SDG Publishers Compact Fellows, which is a mouthful. But yeah, looking at how to drive change and accelerate our progress towards SDGs more broadly.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to have everybody on the call today, and I want to dive right in with a really big question, which is, what are some strategies or approaches that either a company or an institution can adopt in order to start working towards a more sustainable future for everyone?
So maybe I'll start from a very generic point of view. I think when we started the Publishers Compact, we definitely saw 2 major buckets. The first is really around responsible business. We need to have our own house in order. I think any business or organization, particularly in today's environment, really needs to have an inclusion and diversity policy, and really needs to start thinking about their carbon impact. And more broadly around, okay, so SDGs, what does that mean? I think the second big bucket, particularly for, I say, the publishing industry, is just that power of content that we have. We have the ability to not only inspire society, generate knowledge, gain insights. I mean, it's amazing what kind of sector that we all work in. So I think there's those 2 major buckets. In terms of first steps, things like signing up to the Publishers Compact. I get a lot of people who sort of come to me and say, well, why did you sign up? I think it's the first step, right? Whether you make your actions now or not, those 10 concrete points of the compact, The first one is, get somebody responsible for SDGs, make it a responsibility, make it a position. And I'm so happy to hear that, Abigail, you're doing that at Knowledge E. And I think the second part of it is to have the discussion. Many times, particularly around SDGs, there's 17 goals. It's really broad, it's complex. Where do you start? Where do you feel like your impact's going to make the biggest difference? But I think having that discussion, particularly at the board level, is the next best thing. So to really get everyone together and kind of say strategically, how is this going to impact us? And what I also see as a general trend is that we're moving away from this idea of corporate responsibility sort of sitting as a side function or an area of your business where it might be a comms moment where you might do a nice fancy report, to where SDGs can actually be a business driver. There is a clear business case for adopting SDGs. There are innovative products that you can do. There are people who will need solutions that relate to the SDGs in the future. And so this just screams opportunity. And I think the publishing sector is a really unique position to kind of fulfill those needs.
Yeah, just echoing what Rachel mentioned, I also strongly believe that, as you mentioned, it's not a compartment within a company. I really strongly believe that basically a company should be mission driven and really think about the impact that it's making, and then to design services and products around that. And really it goes a long way. It's not just for, just to have a fancy word on basically what you're doing, or as a show. It's really having that mission at the top, believing in making an impact, and that will trickle down in all the different activities. And really, once that mission is there, that sets the direction. And of course, there's so many ways, as you mentioned. Just memorizing all of the 17 goals is a different task for most of us. But basically, once you start taking action in any of the directions, some you can have a more direct impact, but for some there's an indirect impact. But once that's at the top of the agenda, making a change, wanting to change people's lives, and to move towards a better world becomes a mission, then everything gets defined around that.
I think that really is true about the way Knowledge E as a company works. We have, obviously I say that because we're an open access publisher and we're the 5th signatories in the region to the SDG Publishers Compact. So obviously we think that we're, working towards that, but it's not just our division. It's not just the fact that we took the decision, or Cameron took the decision, because it was before I joined, to be an open access publisher, not gold open access, but a diamond platinum one. But it's also down to, we have another platform, Zendy, which is, it has a premium service, but it also has an open access service. And again, it's providing this free content to as wide an audience as possible, particularly within this region. Down to all the work poor Abby got assigned the role. I'm not entirely sure she wanted it initially, but she's done amazing work, just sort of really making us as a company think about everything, both the broader picture and the goals of how we want to encourage sustainability, specifically around publishing, but more broadly, on a sort of the big picture scale, down to the sort of more niche operational aspects. Abby, I don't know if you want to talk about some of those as well.
In terms of the other ways that we're contributing to the SDGs? Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, you've spoken about the open access, providing open access to research. And I think just kind of going a bit further into that is the fact that that means that, like, part of that is that we're helping to support and particularly researchers in low and middle income countries and emerging economies to actually publish their research. That's kind of one element of the SDGs, and also providing them training and support in being able to conduct that research and in knowing how to share those results more widely. So there's that element, but the fact that it is also open access research, and that we also actively try to further disseminate, share, particularly research that is being conducted on topics related to the SDGs, means that we're also kind of facilitating others in tackling the SDGs, because others can use the research that we're providing access to on things like, diseases that are particularly prevalent in low and middle income countries, or to help to create strategies on food security or alternative energy, things like that. So there's kind of those two different elements. And I think it's also, there's also a whole other branch of this that we work quite a lot on, which is the focus on improving the quality of and access to education. So we have a lot of focus on providing training and consulting on that. And of course, with our the Knowledge Foundation, which has provided different types of support, for example, in building schools and funding education initiatives in these sorts of target countries, which are of high focus for the SDGs. So I think, as well as, you talk about those kind of operational things, which we do, even kind of within the office and within our team, doing things like promoting, environmental sustainability with recycling and eco-friendly practices in the office. So I think that's kind of relates to what Rachel was saying about how, getting things on track kind of within the company itself is important as well, not just your sorts of client-based or outward-focusing approaches. Yes.
Oh, thank you. That's great. So I would like to actually circle back. So Rachel and Emily, you were both talking about the Publishers Compact, and I just want to touch base on it. If we have any listeners who aren't familiar with the Publishers Compact, would you ladies like to talk a little bit about, what signing the Publishers Compact actually means? What are the commitments? Maybe Emily, if you want to talk about if there's a specific area within the 10 that Knowledge is more focused on, maybe just kind of give an overview for some of our listeners who may not be as familiar with what it is and what it means.
I'll hand over to Rachel first, because she's involved in the original.
I know, that's really impressive. As a side note, I want to hear about what the behind the scenes conversations were. Like, how did you narrow it down to the 10? And that's a whole side conversation.
Indeed. It was an initiative which was really born out of what I think is a fabulous joint industry publishing sector-wide project, which was the SDG Children's Book Club. And it was something that the International Publishers Association, the United Nations Publications Team, the International Federation of Librarians, we had the Booksellers Association, and we had Bologna Children's Book Fair. We came together to basically say, okay, we should do something in terms of content. And we created a reading list for all 17 SDGs in all 6 official UN languages for children aged between 6 and 12. So something completely separate from my day job. But we launched it, and we were kind of sitting there thinking, oh my God, we couldn't believe by the time we got to SDG 15, 14, 13, the amount of content that was being published by publishers on these themes, which were climate change for children aged between 6 and 12, was amazing. We were looking at, gaps in the market as well between, it was a bit hard, I'll be completely honest, in some of those SDGs to find, a Chinese language book, which might be around certain SDGs, or a Russian book, which might be around other certain SDGs. And so we really thought, okay, there's something here that we should be doing. And many other sectors had created similar pledges to create the momentum. So in 2020, in the lead up to Frankfurt Book Fair, the IPA and the UN launched the SDG Publishers Compact. We were unsure because it was right in the middle of COVID, exactly what was going to happen to that. And we're so impressed that over a period of not yet 2 years, I think we're a year, 18 months in, we are now at over 222 signatories. We have signatories which are little indie publishers in Brooklyn. We have big national publishing associations such as the French National Association or the UK Association. We have book fairs such as Guadalajara, Frankfurt Book Fair, London Book Fair, who have signed up. And we have a range of publishers. And the STM, so academic publishers, were among the first to really get to grips with SDGs and really sign up. And we were so happy to see Elsevier, Spring in Nature, and companies like Knowledge E sign up and really sort of say, okay, yeah, we're going to take it serious. The compact is essentially 10 concrete steps. They're quite generic, but they cover 3 main areas. One is really sort of, you know, let's make a pledge. Let's put some resources and time and energy. So like I sort of mentioned, having somebody responsible for SDGs, having some budget, prioritizing an SDG. So kind of that strategic approach. The second kind of big bucket's around awareness. A lot of the commitments is around communicating that to your staff. Awareness, and particularly from the UN, is the first step for action. Got to know what it is. So, you know, having that as a framework that you'd be communicating internally in terms of our publishing sector to our customers, to our in-house editors if you're in academic publishing, to our external editors if you're in academic publishing, is all really incredibly valuable to create the momentum of change that we want around sustainable development. And I think the final one was really around the content piece. So thinking exactly through, okay, you've got content, we're a really interesting sector. You know, I always sort of say, we don't manufacture pens, right? We manufacture inspiration. It's amazing. And that contribution really needs to align with some of those SDG themes. So we want publishers to be producing content on this, having special issues, thinking about categorizing or providing, you know, taxonomies or classifications around SDGs. And so that was the kind of the third big bucket to the compact. And, you know, like I said, it has been one of the most successful compacts the UN have launched. And we're now in the lead up to sort of Frankfurt, we're now thinking about a stock take about where the progress has been made. So we're going to do a survey to all the signatories coming out soon, so people can let us know, you know, where their challenges have been and what progress they've been made on there, so we can provide further support to accelerate everybody's progress in this area.
Yeah, indeed. One of the items was reporting on the progress, and we just recently published our blog on 1 year into the pack. So this was written by Abigail, and she was summarizing all the efforts in the company. So definitely one of them have been ticked.
I love it.
Yes, but more, as we can see in the blog itself.
Sam, to return to what you were saying about what we're doing as a division, obviously, as I mentioned, we are an open access publisher, and that means we are assiduously encouraging everyone within the region that we work with, but also the other emerging markets where we have a foothold, to really start to consider open access. And I think one of the big things we're doing, which is we perceive it very much as part of our you know, work as a signatory of the SDG Publishers Compact, but it is perhaps a somewhat indirect route, is that we are trying to really start to address the widespread mistrust and misunderstanding of open access and the broader sort of open science movement within this region, which is sometimes quite a profound mistrust in some of the key stakeholder groups within the research ecosystem, sort of the regional research ecosystem. So we're doing a lot of work around trying to get people to build up the trust in open access, whether it's we launched as a non-profit initiative a sister activity, I guess, for want of a better word, to the Think, Check, Submit, that allows users to identify predatory conferences and the publishing that is typically associated with that and avoid them. So that's sort of, again, if they can avoid the predatory ones, our hope is that they'll learn to trust the non-predatory conferences and publishers, but also we're in the process of launching what we hope will be a regional initiative, but the first step is the Forum for Open Research in MENA this October, which is going to be a big conference. It's going to be based in Cairo. Then we will hope to have an online element as well. And it's really bringing together those global experts and key regional stakeholders from all levels, whether you're, you know, the senior government official or head librarian, or even an individual researcher dealing with some aspect of open access or the broader open science and the UNESCO pillars, and really bring everyone together to start to sort of facilitate that collaborative relationship in the hope. Our goal is to really start to develop a sort of core kernel of sort of actionable insights and practical policies that people can use to start to expand the engagement within each of their institutions with open access. And we've been incredibly lucky that we've got the support of the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, the EKB, and UNESCO as well are also supporting us in this event. So fingers crossed we get lots of people coming. If you're listening, please do come. There is a website. We have a call for papers out. So if you have any insights and you're a listener, please do consider submitting a proposal or just attending and coming and joining us to hear what everyone else has to say about it.
Yeah, I think just to add on what Emily's mentioning, so when the emphasis on open research, open science, and open access is really targeting SDG number 10 and reducing inequalities, where in general people do not have access to research or find it difficult to either discover or find the research. Of course, open access is not the only way, and Emily mentioned, for example, other innovative ways of providing access at an affordable way, like Zendi, for example, where people cannot afford access. So a lot of it is really targeting SDG number 10 and supporting in that way. But when it comes to the Publishers Pact, I think we've done very well in the first 5, as Abigail's blog also suggested. We've also worked on number 10. But things like allocated, we have our foundation, which a lot of our mission-driven work is funded by the foundation. But one of the things moving forward definitely would be to allocate some funding specifically to the SDG element, as it was touched by Rachel as well, and as one of the 10 steps that publishers can make. But it's definitely been a great experience. And as Rachel mentioned, it's at the beginning, it's really all about awareness. Like many years ago at the supermarket, we'd be shopping and like just a plastic bag for each item and not really being conscious or aware. But a lot has changed now. Now, even if there's no bags, you would prefer to carry things and you're really conscious about what you use and how you recycle. So all of that comes from awareness. It's not just people don't want to do it, but when you don't know it, then it's not possible to take action. So really one of the major elements and one of the things that is changing, and it can change within the company, is to make employees and all individuals aware on how we can contribute. So a lot to be done. It's just at the beginning, but we've learned some very good lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Rachel, you said something really interesting at the very beginning when you were answering the question about how did the initiative get started, and you said it actually started from another initiative that was across different institutions. This book list that y'all created, and it reminded me of a question that we have here on the list today, and I think it's really interesting that you gave that example. Essentially, the 17th goal highlights the importance of partnerships in bringing about change, and so my question is, can we elaborate on that a little bit more, talking about how these partnerships can promote institution and individual efforts towards achieving the SDGs? I think that from the perspective of Knowledge E, we've been a highly collaborative company from our inception. When Cameron started the company 10 years ago, that's really been a core foundation. We always say when we meet an organization, how can we complement, how can we collaborate, instead of how can we compete with you? And so I think that's really underpinned in terms of our operations, but I think it would be really interesting to hear everyone's kind of opinions or examples of how they've seen partnerships really facilitate this move towards more sustainable futures and supporting the SDG development.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, partnerships, it's number 17, but it could possibly be number 1 in terms of
Yeah.
I think partnerships around the compact in itself is now a community of signatories. People who have said, hey, it's super important and we're going to put this as a priority in our business. And that in itself is step 1. And, we're looking at having a sustainability session in Frankfurt Book Fair, for example, but also in other areas where we come together as a sector to really, get together and talk to our fellow signatory members. It's great that you published the blog, and I'm sure that there's some challenges that you might have faced that when you start talking to other signatories, they might have faced it as well. So I think the first step in terms of partnerships is definitely that community we're trying to build. We're hoping that next year we'll be able to further hone in on those who have prioritized the same goals. So you can think about some of those actions which have happened amongst the signatories. The second thing we also did was to launch the International Publishers Association dashboard, and I'm sure we could share a link. It's basically an area where all publishers, regardless of whether you're academic, trade, or education, you can put your initiatives and your projects and interesting information to share, not only across the sector, but with everybody else. So we have a way of sharing all of this amazing work that's going on globally towards SDGs within our own sector. So I think fundamentally that's kind of like one area. If I was to really then dive into STM and to academia and higher education, it's amazing. I think over the last 5 years, the amount of researchers who want and are demanding SDGs be integrated into higher education is astounding. I mean, it's on every priority. If you look at the International Science Council, if you look at funders, if you look at any sort of research agenda, there is an SDG related kind of element to this now. So it's coming from all elements. And I feel like it is this idea of thinking through change. We've mentioned quite a lot about open access and open science, but it's also thinking about what is impact of higher education, of research, of innovation on society more generally, because what we tend to do is reward universities and research institutions based on their research output, right? Based on citations or things like that. Or it could be around teaching, right? If you're a business school, your bread and butter in terms of cultivating the world's leaders is based on, something that was quite old now that we're looking at the issues that we're facing in terms of our planet and our people. How do we change that? Is there a business school that's going to really accelerate tomorrow's leaders and get them to understand SDGs? And that's a really interesting conversation. There was a company called Cabell's. They've come out with a journal intensity SDG ranking, where they looked at the business journals, right? So which business journals are publishing on this? Can we create that system change? And what's interesting in terms of higher education, we see the same thing happening in terms of the Times Higher impact rankings, which is, again, the first time we're looking at things beyond research and research output and teaching. What does that look like? Now, there's loads of stuff that we as publishers can contribute in terms of that. But that culture change is around partnerships, because nobody has all the answers, particularly on climate change, which I also drive. Like, nobody has all the answers. So we do need to be collaborative here. And so it is opening those lines of dialogue, which I think have traditionally been closed between different parties. So UNESCO's report on open science, for example, is a great way of opening the conversation, right? So what is a librarian's view of SDGs? What's the funders? Where's the research institutions? Where's publishing? And how can we work together? And we haven't really done it. And I think maybe the best example I can think of at the top of my head is COVID, where we kind of had this goal, we kind of had the moonshot and we went for it, and we got the vaccine. It wasn't the end, we had to get people to take the vaccine, but we did see the acceleration. And I think that's where we're starting to see that culture change, and little things that we might be able to do in our own business practices. For example, if we think of reducing inequalities at Elsevier, we've introduced a new way to self-ID within our editorial manager. So we know, what gender, or if you would like to disclose that information, we can start tracking that, and we can start making changes and seeing what incentivizes and to get that diversity metrics up. That's a really concrete example. It is sort of starting to happen in different ways, but we're kind of at a really exciting time. I get the feeling like it's going to just snowball as institutions, governments, business, private sector, researchers, young people all get to grips with SDGs. It will become something that I think we'll increasingly see it. Whether you're at the airport, you might even see the logo. I call it the rainbow of love, because it's sort of like that color, and you have it on the badge, and I mean, it just brings so much joy. So I mean, I can never fault it. I can never stop talking about it.
Well, I think you're in the right line of work then.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to partnerships, it's always that equation that 2 + 2 does not equal 4. Sometimes it equals 5, 10, and with the right partnerships, even 100. So it's really by people getting together and joining forces for a common goal that things change. And yeah, we did talk about the impact rankings and the Times Higher Education impact rankings in one of our previous Knowledge eSpeak sessions, and the shift and the role of higher education in moving towards these sustainable development goals. But also really, as you mentioned, it's good to hear about the journals list as well, because I was even thinking it would be good to be able to impact rather than number of citations, the impact of people's research based on, for example, the contribution towards the SDGs. So it's really shifting that mindset and being able to look at different things from a different angle. And there's just so much that can be done. It's just, as you mentioned, within the company, outside the company, in the efforts. When it comes to collaboration, one area that I can think of that is like really necessary and important to make a change, for example, on the Zendi project, it all depends on collaborations. So the idea is to provide affordable access to individuals across the world through coming up with a Netflix or a gig economy subscription-based model. And it requires publishers to be open to that sort of business model and looking at different ways, not only to have revenue, but also support those individual researchers who are not part of a big academic institution that can afford access to a subscription. We're talking about the independent researchers, some small corporates, just individuals who want to become more knowledgeable in a different area. A great example was you mentioned COVID, and all publishers coming together and provide access to COVID related information for free across the globe. Another example is, for example, in Zendi, we're trying to provide free access to various content, even though it's done individually by publishers. And one other initiative, we want to enable access in Ukraine for all the individuals who are being impacted by the war through Zendi. So it's all about action and how collaboration can lead to action. Of course, it's the next step after awareness. Awareness is key, as we discussed earlier, but beyond awareness, it's also time for action. And it's like really, once it becomes a priority within a company, it's to be able to identify those areas and to take action against it, not just words. Of course, it's a learning curve. It's new to many. We don't all have it right, but as long as we're open to learn and we're open to move towards that common goal, then mistakes can happen, but definitely everyone's working towards a better collaboration. And it's at the end of the day, all these goals are leading to a world becoming a better place for everyone. So that common goal is something that we can all strive to.
Yeah. So I think, Cameron, that what you just said, I think is so poignant, but also it brings up kind of, if I'm being the devil's advocate, I feel like change is hard for people, change is hard for big organizations. And particularly when we think about the history of academia, you know, the start of our industry was an ivory tower. It was an exclusive club. And so even though that was a long time ago, it is still a paradigm shift, I feel, for a lot of organizations. And Cameron, you know, privately, you and I have had conversations about your approach to business and this idea that giving sometimes without the expectation of something in return yields benefits like long down the line that you never even thought of. And so, you know, when we think about honing in on SDG 10, which is all about reducing inequalities, I want to bring up that topic. And I also want to meld it with kind of this idea of incentivizing businesses to adopt these policies for more than just it's the right thing to do. You know, so we know that, like, intrinsically as humans, we know that reducing inequalities is the right thing to do, but that change can sometimes be difficult, or changing your policies or changing your operations, or this incentive of how can we possibly make the highest profits that we can, because that's our job as industry and private sectors, maybe not within the higher education sector, but within private companies that operate around that sector. So I'm rambling a bit. You can see I've got lots of ideas in my head, but kind of if we want to talk about this idea of how can we reduce inequalities, and also why is that important? How can we incentivize businesses to also make that change and realize that it's important for more than just it's the right thing to do as a good human? What do you guys think about that?
I just want to add 2 points. One thing that you mentioned and something that Rachel mentioned at the beginning. So the corporate social responsibility part is not just a department within a company.
Right.
Personally, and the way that I've seen things happen over the past 10 years is that if you've got the right goal, if you've got the right drive, the right motivation, the business will come itself. As it was discussed earlier, there's just so much space within the industry to come up with products, ideas, and innovative ways to contribute towards these goals. And all of this, for those who want to put this into numbers, it means it can mean revenue. But the thing is that for me, I personally think that once you get revenue at the goal, things change as the main objective. Revenue is important. Companies need to sustain, they need to grow. They're providing, so far we're more than 70 individuals within Knowledge, all supporting families. So, the income, it is all important for not the individual, but also for the company to be able to grow and do all the different initiatives. So it is important, but when it becomes the driver, then I think you have a contradiction over there. You can't be profit driven and then be able to sometimes contribute to some of these goals. But the other way around, sometimes you can be contributing towards the goals and the profits will come. So this is what I'm trying to explain. It's the other way around. I think if you do business in the right way, with the right idea, I don't say that everything would work. You do have to follow all the requirements. But if you've got that as a priority, the financial element will also take care of it, will be taken care of.
I think from my perspective, I definitely agree. But I think the incentives are there. If we take about, SDG 10 and maybe look at it through an inclusive and diversity lens, I mean, nobody stays in a company these days that doesn't have an employee resource group that's about race and ethnicity or gender or generations or sexual orientation, whatever flavor of diversity, whatever multiple lens you want to put on there. They don't stay there. And I think increasingly what they'll do is they'll go on to, sites like Glassdoor and make it explicitly clear why they left. So, we're not these, I mean, you mentioned ivory towers in terms of, academia, but I find businesses are no longer these, closed door kind of tops. People want the culture and the young people. I always think the people who were taking to the streets to protest over the lack of climate change 3 years ago are now our junior people in our workforce. They're 18. They were 15 and 14 a few years ago. They're now 18, starting their degrees perhaps. These are the agents of change which are coming into our organizations. And it's really clear. I mean, you can look at any of the marketing research. They want purpose-driven work. They want to go in and feel like they belong and they should deserve to belong. And they want to come in and know that they're going to make the planet more sustainable, because quite frankly, they're going to be here when we're at, 2 degrees global warming, right? So, I do see the winds of change coming where you do have this definite incentivized, if you want to be competitive, get the best talent, get the most innovative people, you're going to have to be a sustainable company. You're going to have your house in order. I think the challenge, and definitely, Cameron, when you were talking about, associating revenue there, is there a monetizable innovation around this? Hell yeah. Yeah. And whether that's, a business model, whether it's a product, whether it's content, we are going to compete in this space, much like we competed on digitalization or AI or these other big sort of macro trends. And I think the final kind of thing for organizations is investors. The number of investors, big investors in the US, who have come out and said they will not invest in unsustainable practices. I mean, if you are a publicly listed trading company, to not have a sustainability strategy, to not have a sustainability report, I mean, you'd have to be well below the game in that respect. So, you know, things like the Publishers Compact I think are good at sort of getting small and medium-sized, you know, companies really embracing this and understanding it in a very light way. But I do find if you're a big company, Elsevier included, but many others, you know, Hachette and Penguin Random House, they're members of the UN Global Compact. You know, they're reporting on 40 pages, they're disclosing things for regulatory, you know, things, because we're also getting the stick, right? Like, it's not just about carrots and incentivizing. You know, there are regulations now. You need to be very clear about the ethical supply chain. You know, if you're printing books, you need to make sure that there's no trace of modern slavery through that supply chain. You know, that's fundamental. If you're operating with carbon, you need to have, we'll need to have some carbon reporting, whether you're based in the European Union or whether you're in the UK or whether you're in other areas of the world. Those things will start coming through as policies at a governmental level start. You know, they'll need to step up to their commitments, not only to the SDGs, all 193 UN member states adopted these. They report on these annually. So, you know, us being very proactive and saying how we contribute is very helpful. But also, I think, you know, in terms of governments coming up to the more legal side. So the Paris Agreement, for example, is a really great one for climate. But, you know, there's more that we could do. Yes. There's more industry specific stuff we could do. Yes. But yeah, I think the incentives are kind of there. If you're not with the program, yeah, I think you're a little bit behind the times. Am I being controversial? I might be a bit controversial now, but
Not for this talk.
No,
Definitely. In every interview that we have, that's a question, and basically a lot of our candidates that are joining the company, they're really drawn because of the various initiatives that the company's been involved in, and they want to be part of making change and having an impact. So that's 100% true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to shift the conversation just a little bit. We've been talking a lot about adults in the space and higher education and research and publishing journals. And I just want to circle back onto youth and onto kids. And so I think we've touched on this just a little bit when we were talking about the book list. And Rachel, you were just mentioning, you know, like the kids who were 15 a few years ago are now joining college and they're becoming junior associates in our different organizations. So, you know, I feel like this is kind of an obvious question, but if there's any kind of new thoughts or new takes on why is it so important to really purposefully teach the SDGs to young people, to youth, to kids, and how do you think that's going to change the future? How is that going to affect us in the long term? What role do they have to play? And what role do we have to play in teaching them?
I can just start from what we discussed earlier, that awareness. Like, you know, when we were kids, there was a different awareness about what's happening around the world. And of course, media was limited to the geographical area that you were like really living. And but that awareness is changing. And as you mentioned, kids are really at the forefront of like pushing for change and wanting change and demanding change. So I think really they play a really important role in what happens and the direction that, you know, governments, companies, policymakers make in the future. But in terms of the role on how we can enable this, I think it goes to, for example, to SDG number 4 and providing that quality education. Not just quality education, but also lifelong learning for those generations who have not learned that in the past. So any sort of means to be able to provide that within an education system, you can see that shift happening in various education systems. Just recently, we are working on a partnerships with relation to COP27 that is happening in Egypt later on with the University of Exeter, UNICEF, and it's to take local folklore stories that have been turned into stories or poetry, and turn that into an expressive means in the form of theatre, I don't know, paintings, drawings, that the kids from around the country, they can contribute, and to see how they can tackle climate change. So that message can turn into something, super, super powerful. So I think, whatever we can do within our means to be able to contribute towards that future and the education and the awareness, not just for kids, but also through the lifelong learning element for also adults as well, that can make a significant change.
I know certainly my son's about to go to a new nursery. He's 17 months now, and he's starting his new nursery in September. And it's an eco nursery. It's, you can't bring processed food in. All their games, all their activities are around, it's all recyclable goods. The parents are asked to bring stuff in every week. Basically, all our recycling from now on will not be going to the recycling dump. It'll be going to the nursery. They don't have any electrical light or anything like that. So it's very much, and the messaging the whole time. I know another child who lives nearby, and anytime he comes around to our house, he's there walking around and getting a chair to stand up and turn off all the lights, because he's like, you mustn't have the lights on. And he's only 3.5, so they're really teaching them really, really young now, and it is that sort of endemic. It's kind of like we're brought up, I was discussing it with my husband the other day, it's that level of we're brought up instinctively to know killing is wrong. We don't know it's wrong when we're really little, you stomp on ants or whatever, but just generally society, you absorb it almost like osmosis. There's certain things you do not do that they are utterly morally reprehensible. And what I think is really interesting about the education now at this very low, young age, is that they're really starting to bring in the idea of environmental wastage as almost like a crime. It's just something that you cannot and should never do, and anyone who does it is bad. Obviously, I'm using this language because you're a child, you don't have the more advanced moral terminology yet. But I think that's a really interesting way of doing it, because whether or not it works for every child, as long as the parents are relatively supportive, they should grow up with that deep-seated abhorrence that we have towards killing, towards anything that damages the environment or hampers sustainability. And I think it's probably the only way to really do the job properly, I guess.
Although I think I would add that there's more and more of a discussion, I think, around kind of how to imbue those sort of thoughts and perspectives in the best way, in terms of there's increasing amount of kind of climate anxiety and anxiety around kind of many of these sorts of SDG type elements of sort of goals and inequalities in young children, because yes, there's more of these discussions and they're hearing more about these problems with the world and what needs to be done, but those discussions need to be done perhaps in a productive, positive light. So it isn't just that children realize there's all these problems in the world and they're responsible for doing many different things to stop them. And, the older generations haven't done anything about it. So the younger generations are the ones that need to sort of save the world. It can lead to almost a paralysis of fear and anxiety. So I think it's when we're talking about, of course, it's important to be talking to children about these issues and for them to have this as part of their perspective. But I think we are only at the start of kind of understanding how to do that in a way that is most beneficial for those children and for them actually being able to carry out actions in their daily lives and advocate for these changes that are necessary.
But I think my take on that would also be that the fundamental element here is that we want our children to be literate and to be understanding how to process information, and then what indeed that you can do around it. The SDG book club that we've done, it's often for the local chapters linked to literacy readathons or reading challenges and things like that. There is a big challenge we have as a society when, after you've stopped reading children's books, is how do you install that love of learning that continues on? And, you know, a great example, specifically maybe from an Elsevier point of view is, you know, engineering. You know, you think of engineers, they're educated, they're deep knowledge, and, you know, we're going to go build this wind farm. But we also then need them to be re-educated to understand, well, how much loss of biodiversity is out there, right? Like, is that wind farm going to displace any sort of local population? What's going to be the impact on all of these other kind of elements? So you get the idea that even education that might start, or literacy or understanding, it's kind of the approach. I think it's more the idea that we need them to understand the principles behind the SDGs, maybe not specifically the details around it, but to understand that we need planet and we need people and we need policies that kind of don't take away from either one of those buckets. And we have traditionally, I think, particularly in the global north, very much exploited our natural resources until we were exploiting other people's natural resources. And then we were thinking not so much about people. And now I think, you know, given COVID, everybody's looking at these issues because we're just seeing those cracks in our society around reducing inequalities. And so I think it's exciting to be young. I do think there's some work that we have to do in terms of confidence building in literacy, in information, in science. You know, it's wonderful we have a vaccine. It's been a challenge to overcome some of that, you know, misinformation out there. Climate change, again, misinformation. So I think, you know, as academic publishers, we do have that challenge of the SDGs are great, and I think they're a great starting point. There's this sort of overarching topic here, which is how do you get the right information in the hands of the right people to make the right actions? And that, I don't think anybody's cracked that big nut.
No. All right, very interesting. Cameron, I want to circle back. You've said a couple of keywords. You, at the very beginning of this conversation, you had mentioned being a mission-driven organization, and about halfway through the conversation, we were talking about companies making profits a key driver versus making a mission or values or trying to solve a problem a key driver. I think we can all agree that having strong leadership is really essential in terms of championing the SDGs, in terms of actually achieving them. And so aside from what we've already talked about, does anyone have any opinions or insights into what are the most important traits or attributes or actions that a leader should have in order to facilitate and driving these changes?
So maybe I can share a personal story,
Yeah.
which is often when you say you're a sustainability director, people go, oh my God, you must be totally sustainable.
Yeah.
And or you get the other thing like, oh, what can I do? It's, you know, bigger organizations. So you kind of have that like, you know, where can you sort of take action? And I think true leadership in SDGs and sustainability, it's just about doing what you can do, which is slightly more sustainable than what you did yesterday. You know, it is really about the small steps as well as the big steps. I mean, we all like a good project, we all like a good media moment, but it's also, you know, about not taking that extra plastic bag. It's also about, you know, maybe reading a nice bedtime story that's, you know, about a world in which we don't have climate change. You know, all of those little steps also make a massive impact. I mean, the level of change needed to achieve the SDGs in the 7 years that we've got left is remarkable. I mean, we're talking systematic change at every level in every part of our society. So I'm okay, particularly when I think about climate change. If someone says, hey, I took the train to work instead of the car, I'm like, good for you. Yes, empowerment, that is leadership. And now go tell 4 of your friends how great that train travel was, you know? And I think that that is just as important as a CEO getting up and talking about their decarbonization strategy in their company. So I think leadership happens and should happen for everybody in sustainability. I feel like that's like SDG number 10, right? Reducing inequalities. Everyone's empowered to do something.
You rightly mentioned it's all about sometimes making small steps that can make a big change. But I think it's also looking at the bigger picture, not just the world around you. So we do live in the world, and we do depend on other people, and we do depend on the planet and the future. So as you know, we're just not the only ones living on this planet. So I think once we look at the bigger picture and the impact that it has, we try and think differently. It's not just myself or my house or my neighborhood or my city or my country. Like what COVID taught us is it's when something happens, it affects everyone. It doesn't matter, no matter where you are. So sometimes looking at the bigger picture makes you approach things differently. And I think it's changing that lens, changing that perspective for individuals. And it's not just about leadership. Everyone can become a leader and driver of change. Every individual is a leader in their own way. Once you do something that's different and it inspires other people, that's a form of leadership. And it's not just necessarily limited to someone with a particular title. Leadership is leading with example, and that's every individual's responsibility, no matter where they are in the organization or society. That's to me, that's leadership. Sometimes leading with an example and showing things can be different.
Okay, so I think that is a really excellent example. I think changing perspective, changing that point of view. And I guess from my perspective as well, too, I feel like something that's really adjacent, but also important to this conversation that kind of builds on what you said, Cameron, is the global perspective. I know from my personal experience, it's really easy to get absorbed in, okay, this is what I'm doing in my community, or this is what I'm doing in my neighborhood. And by having the opportunity to actually travel, to do work in countries that are different from my own, you know, working in countries that have different levels of development than my own, and actually having that empathy and those lines of communications with people who you know, like if you call a spade, there's families in developing economies that go, I don't care about plastic straws. That's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is making sure that my kids have food, you know, so we're really talking at a very high level about sustainable practices. But I also think from a perspective of leadership is having the open communication. You know, Rachel, you had mentioned that we want to teach our students to be literate, to actually understand. I would also argue that in addition to that piece of literacy, that piece of being able to critically appraise whether information is legitimate, you know, whether it passes the test of being a good resource, is also that importance around empathy and openness to really understand perspectives that are very different from yours. Because until we achieve that SDG goal where there are no inequalities, and I hope that's achieved on this planet before we destroy ourselves, but I think the first step with those kids is really exposing them to really things that are different from what they experience, and opening that dialogue and allowing them to have that empathy towards people who have different circumstances, whatever they may be, you know, around that spectrum of diversity. So
yeah, I definitely think that the quality education, providing
Yeah.
quality education should encompass all those elements as well. It's not just about, as Rachel mentioned, just sciences and engineering. It's just the impact and the connectivity. We've talked about interdisciplinary programs and really having a holistic approach to solving problems. So I think that quality education should really encompass all these aspects to be able to make a positive contribution.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I just want to wrap up with one final question, which is what's next? What are we doing next? Rachel, you said we've got about 7 years left to achieve these goals. So what's next on the agenda? What are we working on for the future?
At least in Elsevier, of course, we've got our focus SDGs, SDG 10 and SDG 5. So gender equality is something that we've been doing for many years. We've put SDG 13 up there. I mean, climate change emergency is getting more and more serious. So for us, we're very much focused in our climate action program. Last year, we published a report called the Net Zero Report, Pathways to Clean Energy, where we looked at clean energy research mapping to really figure out where the innovations happening in there. Spoiler alert, China's leading the way here. But, you know, those sorts of things to really kind of, you know, help equip us to take those changes that we need to make in the next couple of years in order to make those Paris Agreement goals. So that's, yeah, where we are. We've got a report coming out, climate action report, which will chart Elsevier's journey. And then on the SDG Publishers Compact, of course, we want to do our first stock take of, you know, where we are in terms of signatories. And so we're looking forward to sharing some of that in the lead up to Frankfurt Book Fair.
Yeah, from our side, from the knowledge perspective, so one aspect is the Publishers Compact, and as the report that the blog that we published, there's definite areas when it comes to collaboration and partnerships and the different suppliers that we need to do extra work on externally. But overall in the company, definitely goal number 10, reducing inequality, has been a high priority for us with all the different programs, with Zendi, with the open access publishing and the open science initiative. That's really top on our agenda, to be able to provide accessible content, really democratizing access to scientific research. That's a big priority for us. We're also really working on grassroots levels as well through the foundation and building schools and providing that quality education in areas where they don't even have that. When it comes to gender inequality, within our company, I think it's the other way around. We're more females than males within the company. So us men are a little bit outspoken, but we've also supported education projects for girls in Cambodia and Nepal, and we're trying to support those. So yeah, so definitely SDG goal number 10, number 4, and through the initiatives of the foundation, sometimes it also affects poverty and hunger as well. So a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. All right. Well, good things ahead in the future.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been a very fruitful conversation. We hope that you found it useful, and we will see you again next time.